Well, I'm Arundel County Executive Stuart Pittman, and I am here in Annapolis at the Guardians of the First Amendment Memorial that this community built. Our partners, the mayor, the governor, nonprofit organizations created this memorial to remember what happened in our county, in our city, 4 years ago today, when we lost 5 heroes that were working at our local newspaper, the Capital Gazette. Gerald Fishman, Rob Hyson, John McNamara, Rebecca Smith, and Wendy Winters. We're also here just a few days after the United States Supreme Court ruled that one of the tools that we have in Maryland to prevent gun violence is going to be taken away from us. In Maryland, we have a law that's very similar to the one that was in New York that they've ruled unconstitutional, that says that you have to show a need to carry a firearm in public, concealed carry. We have a very similar law in Maryland, and our Attorney General is looking at what the implications are for our laws, but we expect to lose that. So it's a difficult time for those of us who work to prevent gun violence. So in this county, 4 years ago, after the shooting at the Capital Gazette, the editorial board asked anybody and everybody who was running for office at the time to write a column saying what they would do to prevent these kinds of shootings and to reduce gun violence. So I took office at the end of 2018 and signed an executive order in April of 2019, Executive Order number 9, creating the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force. And we have some members of that task force here, one of whom will speak, 2 of whom will speak, our health officer as well. At the end of that process, June 5th, 2020, the task force released a final report with 55 recommendations for things that we could do to reduce gun violence in our county and our city. One of those was to declare gun violence a public health crisis. And another was to engage our Department of Health in the work of studying gun violence and making recommendations for preventing it. It wasn't long after that a federal law got changed, and the federal government, after nearly 20 years of failing to study gun violence as a public health issue, started again. In 2020, finally the federal government started to fund the CDC and NIH to do gun violence research. So Dr. Kalyana Raman, who you'll hear from, our health officer, hired a woman who's here named Bella Young. Thank you for doing all the work, Bella, who convened a new entity called the Gun Violence Intervention Team. It was modeled after our opioid intervention team that every jurisdiction in Maryland has to fight against the opioid epidemic. So that group includes our police department, mental health agencies, Office of Emergency Management, Health and Human Service agencies. And they've been meeting ever since then. And what we're here to do today is to present the strategy that they have published today, Gun Violence Intervention Team Strategic Plan. Dr. Kalyana Raman will talk about some of what's in that. But first, I want to introduce Mayor Gavin Buckley, who will give his thoughts. He and I laid a wreath this morning here at the memorial and had a moment of silence to remember the lives that were lost, and have since that time been working together in the city and the county to prevent gun violence. So, Mayor Buckley.
Thank you all for being here. This is a special place and a sacred place for the city of Annapolis. It will outlast all of us politicians, but we will never forget our friends, the journalists that we lost 4 years ago. Every day in America, gun violence kills more than 100 people, with another 200 shot and wounded. In Maryland, that's 724 people a year who die, and 107,447 people who are wounded by guns. The city of Annapolis is not immune to this traumatizing violence. Today marks 4 years since our city experienced the tragic mass shooting of the Capitol Gazette and the heartbreaking loss of 5 beloved community members. Since I was first elected a little more than 4 years ago, I've had to stand with survivors of that terrible day and with many other victims of gun violence. I've had to comfort families in our town whose family members' lives were cut short. I've also had to make too many statements of condolences to other grieving communities across America who, like Annapolis, find themselves in the national headlines in the aftermath of a mass shooting. It's all too much. After Buffalo and Uvalde, we saw that public opinion polling shows that American people are strongly on the side of sensible gun safety legislation. In fact, for the first time in decades, Americans are beginning to see the progress from elected officials. I want to acknowledge and thank Congress for their bipartisan gun safety legislation passed last week and signed by President Biden on Saturday. But as soon as legislation makes progress on closing the loophole on domestic abusers, creating an incentive for states to pass red flag laws, and expanding background checks, the Supreme Court failed to read the room and struck down a New York state law that restricted concealed carry. That decision could have impacts for us. Maryland is a similar state, has a similar state law, which, if the NRA has its way, will trickle down to our state and make each and every one of us a little less safe. But laws and legislation aren't the only places where we must work towards gun safety. As court decisions open loopholes and our laws evolve, we must also find new ways to keep our community safe by working within our community. I thank County Executive Stuart Pittman and the Gun Violence Intervention Team who have done that difficult work of coming together across a partisan divide to talk about a way forward. In Annapolis, our No Harm team in the Mayor's office is working in partnership with the County Health Department to develop a robust, tailored model of violence interruption that seeks to halt the spread of gun violence on the ground in our local neighbourhoods. The Mayor's office that I lead is committed to working with our government and our community partners to do the work needed to build a safer community. We all have a part to play, so I hope you will join us as allies in this work. The safety and security of our city, of our families, of our children is too important to do otherwise. And so thank you for having me here today. I look forward to the rest of the comments. Thank you all.
So now I want to introduce our amazing health officer, Dr. Nilesh Kalyanaraman, who came into the job when we were nearing the end of the work of the gun violence prevention team. And I think we could all agree that his public health perspective was clearly the direction we wanted to go. And so I want to thank him for the work that he's taken on, even during the pandemic, opioid intervention, and all the other work that the health department does to help us tackle this crisis.
Thank you, County Executive. Thank you, Mayor. So gun violence takes different forms in our community. We lose loved ones to suicide, homicide, and the rare but traumatic mass shooting. After the tragedy at the Capitol Gazette 4 years ago, we promised to make our community safer. For the 3 children who were shot and injured in Annapolis and so many others, we must make our communities safer. For all the families who have lost loved ones to gun suicides, we must make our homes safer. One part of our effort to make our communities safer is the Health Department-led Gun Violence Intervention Team. It brings together a wide range of stakeholders to understand the drivers of gun violence and address those root causes to prevent injury and death. The Gun Violence Intervention Team uses a public health approach to prevent gun violence. Discussing gun violence is contentious, but we can all agree that there has to be less violence. Decades ago, we saw skyrocketing highway deaths, so we intervened using a public health approach. Manufacturers installed seatbelts, airbags, and safer designs. We educated the public on safe driving and the dangers of driving while intoxicated. And death rates came down. So we're taking the same approach with gun violence. Today, the Gun Violence Intervention Team is releasing its strategic plan. Over the past many months, we've compiled the data on gun violence in our county, reviewed strategic plans of gun violence teams across the country, gotten input from community members, and identified evidence-based practices. The strategic plan has 6 goals: coordinating gun violence work in the county, monitoring evidence-based gun laws, increasing education and awareness, collecting and reporting on data, disrupting cycles of community violence, and coordinating victim services. I want to focus on one of those goals, and the mayor touched on that. That's disrupting cycles of community violence. In partnership with the city of Annapolis and TOLA and the mayor's office and Bella and the health department have been leading our work in bringing together organizations, advocates, some of whom are here today, like Sonia Penn from the Conflict Resolution Center, to partner with a national organization called Cure Violence to help us develop an evidence-based and local approach to violence interruption in the city. I think it's critical to recognize that these types of interventions do break the cycle of violence, and they're exactly what this Gun Violence Intervention Team is all about. We have so many partners: Darius Stanton, Georgia Noon-Sherrod, Pam Brown from the partnership, and so many others who are coming together to partner in this work. As much pain as there has been in our communities, our public health approach to gun violence will move us towards safer communities, and today is another step on that path. Thank you.
And no conversation about gun violence should really take place without hearing from the families that are left behind as a result of those murders. And so we have with us a member of our gun violence prevention team, Maria Hyacin, widow of Rob Hyacin, a beloved editor and writer for the Capitol Gazette. Maria?
As I have said to many people, it is weird to be me. I have a weird relationship with Annapolis. I love this town for many reasons, including the fact that all of this has happened from these amazing government officials, a Republican, Democrat. It doesn't matter. It is, in fact, a public health issue. And I spent many wedding anniversaries just across the way there, boarding the Woodwind and celebrating years of marriage to Rob. But here I find myself to tell you how important this work is. Gun violence is a complicated issue. It is not a push this button and it will be fine. It takes a patchwork of laws, of regulations, of efforts from the community to help us quell this scourge that is very much a part of our world. And so I again want to commend these humans for what they have assembled. I was lucky enough to be a part of that gun violence task force. And I want to call on all of you, whether you are journalists or folks that live in the community, to be aware of what's going on, be it in the Supreme Court, be it on your street corner, be it in the election that is about to follow, whether it is a primary or a presidential election. Make sure you're informed and make sure that you understand that we all bear a responsibility here. Emergency protection orders are part of what can help us here, and they won't work if we don't know how to make them work. So if you know someone who is acting in a way that suggests they should not have a gun, please speak up, and please reach out to the legal community and do something to make it possible that they don't possess their guns for at least a few days, and make sure that what happened here could not. Today is weirdly my birthday, which is an odd thing to talk about. But 4 years ago, I woke up thinking nothing about gun violence, not one thing, and figured my husband would come home and we'd cut a birthday cake and sit on the deck, check in with the kids, and none of that happened. I thought it could never happen to me. And it did. I could stand here for hours and tell you my story. You know what? So could tons of other people. And it's going to take all of us for a long time. Thank you, Supreme Court, to work to try to make it not happen again. And it's not just the mass shootings. It's up the road in Baltimore. It's up the road on West Street, some random thing. So it's going to take all of us, and it's going to take this patchwork that has been assembled here. And I call on every community to bring parties together and make such a thing happen elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria, for being brave enough to stand up here.